Marcus stood there for a moment, feeling the sting of dismissal, but choosing not to let it show. His heart pounded with a mix of disappointment and determination. He had always been told that talent would eventually get recognized, but today, it felt like another reminder of how hard it was to break into the elite world of art. He walked over to the assistant, a young woman named Sarah, who was sitting behind a polished desk near the entrance. Sarah smiled kindly at him, recognizing the nerves in his posture. "Can I help you with something?" she asked softly. "I'd like to leave my portfolio for Mr. Thomas to review," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the burning sensation of being judged already. Sarah took the portfolio from him, glancing at the cover before looking back up at Marcus. "I'm sure he'll get to it, but it's a busy day, so it might take some time." She hesitated for a moment. "Don't let him discourage you too much," she added quietly, offering him a reassuring smile. Marcus nodded, thankful for her empathy but still weighed down by the experience. He walked toward the exit, determined to keep moving forward, even though the encounter stung more than he'd like to admit. As the door swung shut behind him, he stood outside for a few moments, taking a deep breath. He hadn't expected things to be easy, but the dismissive attitude of Thomas, the gallery owner, had hit him harder than he anticipated. He wasn't sure if he was angry, hurt, or just disappointed in the way the world seemed to dismiss artists like him. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let this rejection define him. With renewed determination, Marcus made a promise to himself that he would make it, no matter how many doors were closed in his face. He would let his art speak louder than the judgments of others. Little did Thomas know, the man he had just turned away was not just another hopeful artist. Marcus had a vision that could not be stifled, and this gallery would eventually realize just how wrong they were to underestimate him. After leaving the gallery, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of frustration. He had expected rejection, but not the kind of dismissiveness that made him feel invisible. His portfolio, filled with intricate designs and deep symbolism, had been brushed aside without even a glance. He understood that art was subjective, but the tone of Thomas's dismissal stung. He had spent years perfecting his craft, and here was a man who hadn't even given him a chance. Marcus walked down the city streets, the weight of the encounter heavy on his mind. He had hoped for an opportunity to speak to someone who would understand his art, someone who could see the passion he put into every stroke of paint. But all he'd encountered was arrogance. As he walked, his thoughts began to shift. This wasn't the first time someone had brushed him off. Throughout his career, there had always been doubters, people who questioned his style, his background, and his ability to succeed in an industry dominated by the privileged few. But Marcus had learned to use those moments of rejection as fuel for his fire. He had learned to turn the pain of being underestimated into something greater. "I'll show them," he muttered to himself, his eyes set with a fierce determination. "One day, they'll see." It wasn't long before Marcus's phone buzzed with a message. It was from an old friend, Jamal, a fellow artist who had been working in the art world for years. Jamal had always believed in Marcus's potential and was always there to offer encouragement when Marcus doubted himself. "Marcus, I heard about the gallery. Don't let them get to you. Keep pushing, man. The world needs to see what you're capable of." Marcus smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for his friend's unwavering support. He tapped out a quick reply, thanking Jamal for his kind words. The message reminded him why he'd started creating in the first place, for himself, for his community, and for the world that hadn't yet learned to appreciate his talent. Hours passed, and Marcus's frustration began to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve. The next day, he headed back to his studio, determined to continue working. His art had always been a way to express his experiences, his joys, and his pain, but now it had become something more. His paintings were a testament to his resilience, a way to show the world that he, too, had a voice that deserved to be heard. Meanwhile, inside the gallery, Thomas was busy holding court with a group of well-dressed clients. He stood near one of the gallery's most expensive pieces, discussing the merits of the artist who had painted it. The clients hung on his every word, eager for his approval. As they spoke, Thomas's mind kept wandering back to Marcus's visit. He didn't remember much about the artist, just that he had looked young and eager, the kind of person who came in expecting too much from a prestigious gallery. He had probably seen hundreds of hopefuls like Marcus, all with dreams of making it big. But Thomas had a sharp eye for talent, and he knew that not everyone had what it took to be in the spotlight. "I'm just trying to protect my client's investments," he thought, adjusting his tie. "You can't just let anyone in." But even as he justified his behavior, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he might have overlooked something. That was when Sarah, the assistant, approached him with an odd look on her face. "Mr. Thomas," she began hesitantly, "you might want to take a look at this." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" he asked, turning to her with a hint of impatience. He had a reputation to uphold, and this wasn't the time for interruptions. Sarah handed him a flyer that had been slipped under the door earlier that morning. It was an advertisement for an upcoming exhibition featuring a young black artist named Marcus Rivers. Thomas looked down at the flyer, not recognizing the name at first. But then his eyes widened when he saw the image of one of Marcus's paintings, a large, vivid piece that immediately caught his attention. The artwork was striking. The colors were bold and full of energy, and the subject matter, a powerful portrait of a black woman rising above a turbulent background, was both emotional and politically charged. It was the kind of piece that demanded attention. "Who is this Marcus Rivers?" Thomas asked, suddenly intrigued. Sarah looked at him, a knowing look in her eyes. "I believe that's the same artist who came in yesterday, the one you dismissed." Thomas frowned, a wave of discomfort washing over him. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The artist he had brushed aside, the one he had mocked without even looking at his work, was now gaining recognition. Marcus Rivers wasn't just any artist, he was someone who had the potential to make a serious impact on the art world. For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt a twinge of doubt. He had seen this kind of art before, the raw, unapologetic kind that commanded respect. But he had been so focused on the commercial side of things, so convinced that he knew what would sell, that he hadn't given Marcus the chance he deserved. As he read the flyer again, a thought struck him: what if he had missed the next big thing? What if Marcus's work was exactly what the gallery needed to reinvigorate its image and attract a new audience? "Sarah," he said, putting the flyer down. "Get me a meeting with Marcus Rivers. I need to see his work, and I need to do it now." The following day, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. It was from Thomas, the gallery owner. "Mr. Rivers, I would like to apologize for our previous meeting," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly polite. "I've had a chance to review your work, and I must say I was wrong to dismiss you. I'd like to offer you an opportunity to showcase your art in our gallery." Marcus paused, stunned. He hadn't expected this at all. After the way Thomas had treated him the day before, he wasn't sure if he could trust the offer. But part of him knew that opportunities like this didn't come around every day. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus replied cautiously. "But I'll need to know more about what you're offering and how you plan to support my work moving forward." Thomas, clearly eager to make amends, agreed to meet in person. As Marcus prepared to meet with the gallery owner again, he couldn't help but wonder if this would be a turning point in his career. Would Thomas truly see the value in his art, or was this just another attempt to capitalize on his success now that the world was starting to take notice? Marcus knew one thing for sure: no matter what happened, he wasn't going to let anyone underestimate him again. The meeting with Thomas had been a turning point for Marcus, but he still couldn't shake the feeling of skepticism that lingered. The sudden shift in Thomas's attitude, from dismissing him outright to offering him a chance to showcase his work, seemed too convenient. Marcus had spent years fighting for his place in the art world, constantly being overlooked because of his background, and now, just as his name was gaining recognition, Thomas wanted a piece of it still. Marcus couldn't ignore the opportunity. It was rare for someone to offer a chance to a black artist, especially one whose roots lay in the working class and whose work came from a deeply personal place. He had spent countless hours perfecting his craft, pouring his emotions and his experiences into each piece. Now, it seemed like the moment was finally here for his art to break into the mainstream. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked tirelessly. He was in his studio every day, pushing himself harder than ever before. The ideas came to him in bursts of inspiration, vivid, emotional, and raw. His paintings explored themes of identity, power, and the resilience of Black people in the face of systemic oppression. He wanted to create art that would leave an impression, something that would spark conversation and force people to reckon with the realities of the world. But more than that, Marcus wanted to make sure that the art he created would speak for itself. He didn't need validation from anyone who couldn't see its worth. His art wasn't just for the elite gallery goers or the art critics, it was for the community, for those who had always been denied a seat at the table. He wanted to make sure his work represented not just himself, but the people who had supported him along the way. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began to gain traction. His name started to appear in more and more art circles, and soon, collectors and art critics were taking note of the unique voice he brought to the art world. It wasn't long before his works were being featured in international exhibitions, and galleries that had once ignored him were now clamoring for his attention. The phone calls came more frequently, each one offering a new opportunity, a new chance to show his work to the world. The art world, once a place where he had been an outsider, was slowly becoming his stage. He had gone from an unknown artist to one of the most talked about names in contemporary art. But Marcus knew that this wasn't just about fame, it was about using his platform to tell important stories. He was still that young artist who had been dismissed in Thomas's gallery, but now, he was someone who could open doors for others. As Marcus's work gained recognition, so did his wealth. His paintings, once priced affordably, were now selling for millions of dollars. The collectors who had once doubted him were now lining up to acquire his pieces, eager to own a part of history. The transformation was astounding, not just for Marcus, but for the world that was beginning to see him for what he truly was, a visionary artist. But with success came challenges. Marcus quickly realized that the art world wasn't as welcoming as it appeared. Though he was gaining recognition, he was still often met with skepticism and prejudice. Many galleries still saw him as an outsider, someone who didn't fit their preconceived notions of what a successful artist should look like. His race, his background, and the subject matter of his work were still barriers that he had to navigate. Despite his success, he knew that his journey had just begun. One day, Marcus received an invitation from a prestigious art auction house. They wanted to feature one of his paintings in an upcoming sale. The piece, a portrait of a Black woman triumphing over adversity, had become one of his most iconic works. It was a bold, defiant piece, and it captured the essence of Marcus's artistic vision. As the auction date drew nearer, the anticipation grew. Marcus watched as the buzz around his work reached a fever pitch. People from all over the world were eager to see how much his painting would fetch. The auction was set to take place at one of the most exclusive venues in New York City, and it was expected to attract some of the wealthiest buyers in the art world. On the night of the auction, Marcus stood at the back of the room, surrounded by well-dressed patrons who had come to bid on his work. He watched as the painting was placed on display, and for a moment, he felt a sense of pride. This was it, the culmination of everything he had worked for. His art was no longer just a personal expression, it was now a part of the global conversation. The bidding began, and Marcus held his breath as the numbers started to rise. He had never seen anything like it. The amount of money people were willing to pay for his art was staggering. With each bid, he felt both elated and overwhelmed. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when his work was no longer undervalued or overlooked. It was finally being recognized for what it was, priceless. When the gavel came down, the painting sold for a record-breaking amount. The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. He had made it. His art was now a commodity, a symbol of his success, and a testament to his hard work and resilience. But even as the applause echoed in the room, Marcus knew that this moment wasn't just about the money, it was about something deeper. It was about proving to the world that he, too, had a voice that deserved to be heard. As he left the auction house that night, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on his journey. He thought back to that first meeting with Thomas, the gallery owner who had dismissed him without even looking at his work. He thought about all the times he had been told he wasn't good enough, that his art didn't fit the standards of the elite. He thought about how far he had come and how much more there was still to achieve. But as he walked into the cool night air, Marcus knew that he was just getting started. This was only the beginning of his journey. The art world had learned his name, but he was determined to make sure it remembered his legacy. Marcus had built something truly remarkable in the years since his first visit to Thomas's gallery. He had transformed from a hopeful artist to a force in the art world, someone whose work was not only valued but celebrated by collectors, critics, and institutions around the globe. The small studio apartment he once worked out of was now replaced by a large, bright space filled with canvases, paints, and assistants who helped him manage his growing brand. His work had garnered attention in places he once only dreamed of. The very same art world that had once rejected him was now clamoring for his attention. Despite the fame and success, Marcus kept his feet on the ground. He never forgot where he came from, and he remained passionate about lifting up the voices of other underrepresented artists. His personal success was only part of the equation. He wanted to ensure that more Black artists, and artists from marginalized communities, had a chance to showcase their work in galleries and museums around the world. He had fought hard to gain access to those spaces, and now he intended to open the door wider for others. One chilly autumn afternoon, as Marcus was preparing for another high-profile exhibition in London, he received a surprising phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it took a moment for Marcus to place it. "Mr. Rivers," the voice said. "This is Thomas. I'm sure you remember me from the gallery." Marcus's mind flashed back to that day, the day he had been dismissed without a second thought. The arrogance in Thomas's voice, the condescending way that had sent him out of the door. The pain of that moment came rushing back, but it was now tinged with a sense of triumph. He had come so far since that encounter. "I remember you, Thomas," Marcus replied, his voice steady but measured. "What can I do for you?" There was a brief silence on the other end before Thomas spoke again. "I've been keeping an eye on your work over the years, and I have to admit, I was wrong about you. I made a mistake back then, and I want to make things right. I'd like to offer you a solo exhibition at my gallery." Marcus couldn't help but laugh, not in derision but in disbelief. The same man who had rejected him, the man who had mocked his potential, was now offering him an opportunity to showcase his art. It was the kind of moment that felt surreal, a full-circle moment where the tables had turned. "I appreciate the offer, Thomas," Marcus said, his tone neutral, though a part of him was still processing the unexpected turn of events. "But I'm not sure what you can offer me that I can't get elsewhere." There was a pause on the line. Thomas, clearly not expecting such a response, took a deep breath. "I understand your hesitation," he said slowly. "But I've come to recognize the value of your work, Marcus. It's rare to see an artist like you, someone who challenges the status quo and creates with such purpose. Your voice is important, and I want to give you a platform to speak from." Marcus thought for a moment. The gallery was prestigious, and an exhibition there would undoubtedly open more doors for him. Yet, he couldn't help but remember how dismissive Thomas had been, how easily he had cast aside Marcus's potential. Still, there was something in Thomas's voice, something genuine, that made Marcus reconsider. "I'll think about it," Marcus said after a beat. "But I'll need to know more about how you plan to support my work, how you'll promote it, and what your vision is for the exhibition. I'm not just going to put my name on a show for the sake of it." Thomas agreed to meet with Marcus in person, to discuss the details. It was clear that the gallery owner was hoping to redeem himself, but Marcus had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. If Thomas truly understood the significance of his art, he would have to show it, not just in his offer but in how he treated Marcus moving forward. A week later, they met at a cafe near the gallery. Thomas arrived early, wearing a sharp suit and looking more serious than Marcus had ever seen him. The once cocky gallery owner now seemed almost anxious, a stark contrast to the man who had once brushed Marcus aside. When he saw Marcus, he stood and extended his hand, but it wasn't the handshake of an entitled art dealer, it was the handshake of a man who was trying to make amends. "I'm glad you could meet with me," Thomas began, sitting down across from Marcus. "I've thought a lot about our past conversation, and I realize that I made a huge mistake. I was too quick to judge you, and I regret it." Marcus studied him carefully, unsure of how much of this apology was genuine and how much was driven by the fact that Marcus had become a major figure in the art world. But he decided to listen. There was no harm in hearing Thomas out. "I'm listening," Marcus said simply. "I want to make this exhibition special," Thomas said earnestly. "I don't want it to be just another show. I want to honor your work and the journey you've been on. I want to celebrate your art and what it represents, not just in terms of its aesthetic value but its cultural significance. Your art tells stories that need to be heard. It's not just about the buyers and the critics, it's about the people who relate to it, who see themselves in your work." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. These were the words he had longed to hear, the recognition that his work wasn't just another commodity, but a reflection of deeper truths. He'd never wanted to be another artist who painted pretty pictures for the rich. His work was meant to move people, to make them think, to challenge their perspectives. "I want this exhibition to be a platform for more than just your work," Thomas continued. "I want it to be a space that invites new voices, artists who might not have the connections or the visibility they deserve. We're going to make this gallery a place that represents the future of art, not just the past." Marcus sat back, absorbing Thomas's words. For the first time, he felt like the gallery owner understood what it meant to be an artist from a marginalized community. It wasn't just about making money or adding another name to the list of successful artists. It was about using the space to tell stories that had been ignored for too long. "All right," Marcus said finally. "I'll agree to the exhibition, but only if we stay true to that vision. It's not just about my work, it's about the movement behind it." Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. I promise you, Marcus, this is going to be different. I want to help you take your art to the next level." Marcus felt a mix of excitement and wariness. There was still a part of him that couldn't fully trust Thomas, but he also knew that this could be an opportunity to push the boundaries of what galleries like Thomas's represented. If Thomas was sincere, then maybe this could be the start of something bigger than either of them had imagined. As Marcus left the cafe, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey he had taken to get here. He had come from humble beginnings, rejected by the very establishment that now wanted to feature his work. He had proven the doubters wrong, and in doing so, he had carved out a place for himself in the art world. But he knew that his journey was far from over. This exhibition wasn't just about his success, it was about ensuring that the doors he had opened would stay open for others. And with that thought, Marcus felt the weight of his responsibility as an artist. He had the power to create change, to shift the narrative of what art could be. And he wasn't about to let anyone forget that. As the weeks passed, preparations for Marcus's exhibition began in full swing. The gallery, once a cold and distant space for the elite, was now abuzz with activity. The walls were being painted, the lighting carefully adjusted, and the floor plan organized to create an experience that would elevate Marcus's work and that of the other artists he had chosen to feature. For the first time, the space felt alive with the energy of art that had something to say. Something important. Marcus had insisted that the exhibition include not just his own pieces but those of other underrepresented artists, emerging Black artists, women artists, queer artists, who had been overlooked by mainstream galleries. He wanted this to be a celebration of diversity and artistic freedom, something that had long been missing from the traditional art world. Thomas had hesitated at first, uncertain of how his high-end clientele would react to the inclusion of works that didn't fit the mold of classic art. But Marcus had been firm. "This is not just about selling art," Marcus had told him in their meetings. "This is about creating a space that reflects the world as it is, not as we want it to be. Art is about truth, and truth is messy. If you can't handle that, then we're not doing this." Thomas had reluctantly agreed, though he couldn't help but feel the pressure mounting. The gallery, with its storied history and wealthy patrons, had always been selective about the artists it represented. This was a big departure from the norm, and Thomas was unsure whether he had made the right decision. As the exhibition date drew near, Marcus found himself reflecting on how far he had come. He remembered walking into the gallery years ago, hopeful but nervous, and being dismissed as just another aspiring artist with no real future. The sting of that rejection had fueled him, propelling him to work harder and push his boundaries. Now, the same gallery that had turned him away was preparing to showcase his art. But more importantly, it was preparing to make a statement about what art could be, what art should be. The night before the opening, Marcus found himself standing alone in the gallery after hours. The space was empty, save for the art that lined the walls, his own pieces, and those of the other artists he had chosen. The energy in the room was electric, and as Marcus walked through the space, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This was more than just an exhibition. It was a declaration. It was his way of saying, "I belong here, and, just as importantly, we all belong here." He paused in front of one of his most recent pieces, a large-scale painting of a black woman with arms raised in defiance, surrounded by swirling colors that symbolized both struggle and triumph. The woman in the painting was a reflection of his own journey, of all the women and men who had fought for their place in a world that often seemed intent on pushing them to the margins. It was his most personal piece yet, and he knew it would resonate with those who saw it. "I can't believe we're finally here," Marcus whispered to himself. The next evening, the gallery opened its doors to the public. The event was set to be one of the most anticipated in recent years, attracting a mixture of art collectors, critics, and the general public. The turnout was massive, a testament to Marcus's growing influence in the art world. The gallery was filled with people eager to see the works of the new wave of artists that Marcus had brought to the forefront. As the guests wandered through the gallery, Marcus stood off to the side, observing them carefully. He could see the shock in some faces as they took in the raw, unapologetic art that challenged their preconceived notions of what art should be. For too long, galleries had been filled with works that adhered to a narrow, traditional aesthetic, art that was palatable to those with wealth and power. But Marcus's exhibition was different. It was brash, it was political, and it was real. And then, as expected, the whispers began. Some guests were puzzled by the inclusion of works that didn't align with their usual tastes. They muttered among themselves, questioning the legitimacy of the pieces. They pointed to the more abstract works, the pieces that conveyed social commentary and questioned the status quo, as though they didn't belong in the same space as the more traditional art they were accustomed to. "This is a little unconventional, don't you think?" one elderly woman said to her husband as they passed a portrait of a young black man with his fists raised in a symbol of solidarity. "But it's so powerful," the man replied, his voice filled with quiet awe. "It's not like anything we've seen before. Maybe that's what makes it special." As the night wore on, the room became filled with a mixture of excitement and tension. Some guests had already begun to make purchases, eager to acquire pieces that were now being heralded as groundbreaking. Others, however, were more reluctant. The art challenged their expectations and forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about race, class, and identity. For some, that was a step too far. Marcus watched all of this from a distance, his eyes never leaving the crowd. He could feel the weight of the room shifting, the energy ebbing and flowing as the guests moved from one piece to the next. He could see the way certain people lingered in front of his paintings, as if they were trying to decode the messages hidden in each stroke of paint. Some of them looked uncomfortable, but many were mesmerized. For the first time, they were seeing something that forced them to engage with the world around them in a new way. And then, as the night reached its peak, Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Thomas standing beside him, his face flushed with excitement. "Marcus, this is incredible," Thomas said, his voice filled with awe. "I can't believe the response. People are raving about your work, and the other artists. I didn't expect it to be like this." Marcus gave him a small smile. "I told you it would be special." Thomas hesitated before speaking again. I'll admit, I didn't fully understand your vision when we first met. But now, I see it. This exhibition is changing the game. It's not just about selling art, it's about making a statement. And you've done that. You've opened my eyes. Marcus nodded, his gaze still sweeping across the room. It's not just about my work, Thomas. It's about the movement behind it. This isn't just art, it's a voice for the voiceless. It's about creating space for artists who have been overlooked for far too long. Thomas stood silent for a moment, taking in Marcus's words. He had come to realize that this exhibition was bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just a chance for Marcus to shine, it was a chance to make a real impact on the art world. A chance to challenge the boundaries that had been in place for so long and push the conversation in a new direction. I'm glad you chose to give us this opportunity, Thomas said finally, his tone more sincere than it had ever been before. I won't forget it. Marcus turned to him, his eyes filled with understanding. The art world needs change, Thomas. And this is just the beginning. The night ended with a sense of accomplishment and excitement, but also with the knowledge that Marcus's journey was far from over. As he left the gallery, his mind raced with the possibilities of what the future held. He had proved himself, not only to Thomas, but to everyone who had doubted him. But this was only the first step in a much larger mission. The world was ready for change, and Marcus was determined to be at the forefront of it.